Okay, so we are glad to be here with you, Mr. Varufakis, and I would like to start talking about the leftist ideology to begin with. So last week we had an election in Britain which to some extent ended with despair for the Labour Party, and starting from there and generally in Western Europe, I would like to ask, why do you think it is that leftist ideology can't reach the masses today as far right can do?
During periods of discontent, when people feel left out, they look at their children and they see themselves, but with a far, far worse future than they had. This hopelessness that is the result of the period after 2008, the great crisis, which is still with us, and which is pushing more and more people into a precarious existence, working without protection, having to borrow money, use credit cards to put food on the table in rich countries like Britain. People who become unemployed, lose their homes, end up living on the street. In this environment, in this framework, when politics has failed so spectacularly to produce hope, it's so easy for a right-wing politician to stand up and look at these discontented people in the eye and say, it's the foreigner's fault. It's the Turks' fault, the Greeks' fault, the Germans', whatever. And I will make you proud again. I will kick out the foreigners. I will build a wall. I will look after you. It's such an easy narrative. It happened with Mussolini, with Hitler, with Franco, and it's happening again today in Italy with Matteo Salvini, in Hungary with Orbán, in France with Le Pen, in Britain with Nigel Farage, and now with Boris Johnson. Telling a story that highlights the truth is more complicated. And when the media, the systemic media, are determined that you don't tell that complicated story, then it's really very difficult for progressives to counter the simplicity of the reactionaries. That is a given. We have this problem. We have this problem everywhere. But in the case of Britain in particular, let's not forget that the Labour Party has, for many, many years, especially under Tony Blair, been responsible for perpetuating the neoliberalism of Thatcher. And since Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader, he has had to face 3 or 4 coup d'etats within the Labour Party by the Blairites. So this was a defeat not of the left, not of Jeremy Corbyn as such. It was a defeat of the extreme centrists within the Labour Party, who placed above all else the destruction of Jeremy Corbyn and a second referendum or the cancellation of Brexit by treating the people who had voted for Brexit in a reaction against the establishment as if they were second-rate human beings. How do we, as progressives, unite the discontented? How do we bring them hope? How do we make them proud by following a humanist agenda is a great challenge for all of us.
Okay, so DiEM 25 is one of the, when we look at the manifesto, has one of the most progressive agendas, and at the same time it paints a really nice picture of Europe's future, talking about climate control, peace, open borders. But when we look at the surge of the far right, do you think, is this still achievable? Or do you think this is a too utopic view for today?
Utopia takes many forms. One form is that of the establishment, who tell us if we keep doing the same thing, things will improve. That's the most utopic project, that of the European Union Commission, establishment and so on. The idea that if business continues as usual, things will get better. No, there's no greater utopia than that. What the right is offering is a dystopia. It's a world where we are all barricaded behind walls. We all hate each other. We come to the brink of war. If we treat the foreigner as a subhuman, then it's very easy to start treating each other as subhuman. So the politics of division and toxicity are the only offering by the ultra-right. Is the DiEM25 manifesto utopian? Yes, but it's a realistic utopia. It's a utopia that could come to bear, that could be implemented if we all work together to do it. Dismissing that which must happen and that which can happen as utopian when what is happening is leading to dystopia is not particularly realistic.
So, talking about the Britain elections, another major election coming up for the world is the US elections. And, this British election was a big deal. Every country, every Western country at least in the world, has gave a lot of space for the media. How do you think the results of it will affect the elections in 2020 for US?
The only happy person in the United States is Donald Trump, especially after the election in Britain, because he's a smart operator. Whatever one may think of him as a human being, and I don't have a high opinion of him as a human being, but nevertheless, I have an even lower opinion of the Democrats who consider Donald Trump to be a fool. He's not a fool, he's smart, and he's very happy. He's very happy because the defeat of Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party in Britain, firstly, consolidates Brexit, which Donald Trump was always greatly in favor of. He's already declared that the European Union is the greatest enemy of the United States, right? Let's not forget that. But beyond that, it's wonderful for him, from his perspective, that this happened now before the beginning of the primaries and the run-up to next year's presidential election in the United States, for this reason. Joe Biden and the extreme center in the United States, the equivalent of the Blairites in Britain, are going to use Jeremy's defeat in Britain as a warning to the Democrats. Don't go with Bernie Sanders, don't go with Elizabeth Warren, because you see what happens if the left, the extreme left, they're not as extreme at all, but anyway, this is how they're portrayed. If the left takes over the progressive force, the Democrats, then we will be trumped, right? And Trump loves that, because what he fears most is an election, a clash, an electoral clash with somebody like Bernie Sanders. Because if Bernie Sanders, or Elizabeth Warren, but in my estimation, Bernie Sanders more so, if he were the candidate, he would defeat Trump. Joe Biden, another Hillary Clinton. Because the good people of the Midwest, the Rust Belt, those who make the difference between victory and defeat in an American election, have had enough of the Democratic or Republican, Wall Street financed and centered so-called liberal establishment that treat them like vermin, that treat them like Untermenschen, that treat them like, subhuman. So Trump is now looking forward to a Democratic Party that will eject Bernie Sanders again, or Elizabeth Warren, in favor of a Joe Biden or something of that sort, because he can run rings around them, around the hard extreme center of the Democratic Party.
Okay, so talking about Trump, one of the major news stories this week was Trump making fun of a 16-year-old environmentalist, Greta Thunberg, and this is not the first time we see a populist leader taking on an environmentalist. Why do you think is that populist leaders hate people who protect our environment or campaign for it?
Trump is a strategist. He doesn't have views. He doesn't have beliefs. If he believed that supporting the environmental movement would be good for him, he would do it. He's, completely amoral. All right. But the power base that he has comprises two kinds of people. One is workers who fear that their jobs will be destroyed if we end dependence on fossil fuels, because they're still workers, so they burn coal. If you stop them burning coal, they will lose their jobs. So they're really frightened. So this is one category of people that Trump is speaking to. Another category of people is the Koch brothers, and all those oligarchs who make mountains of money out of fossil fuels or related anti-environmental activities. So this is his constituency. So if you, me, the greatest philosopher of the world, Greta, has an impact in public opinion with an environmental narrative, an ecological narrative, he's going to attack us, right? And what most people don't understand, but they should understand it, is that Donald Trump is beyond morality, both in terms of his philosophy and in terms of his propaganda strategy. When he behaves abysmally, when he's misogynist, when he says things that are plainly false, fake, post-truths, as we say, when he outrages the basic moral standards, even of the evangelicals, right? The average member of the commentariat thinks, oh, surely that must reduce his appeal. No, it doesn't. Because the people in the Midwest who are angry, when they look at the misbehavior of Donald Trump, they don't like him. They don't trust him. It's not that they think, oh, what a great guy, I agree with what he said. No. Very often they say, oh, this was disgraceful behavior towards Greta, for instance, right? But their main concern is to express their own anger. So they look at Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, all the good people in Wall Street, the New York Times, and so on. People that for 30 years have neglected them, have pushed them, into the mire. They have frozen their income. They have made them take on new loans, mortgages and so on. Then they lost their homes. Then they saw their working conditions diminish further. It wasn't Donald Trump that did this. It was the liberal establishment. It was the people reading the New York Times. So they asked themselves a very simple question. How can we piss off those who read the New York Times? By voting Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is so outrageous. So that's how it really works. And until we understand that, we don't understand how he can get stronger by behaving in a way that even his supporters don't like.
Okay, so going back to DiEM 25, looking at the board or people in the moment, it ranges from Jane Sanders, Julian Assange, Slavoj Žižek, some of the biggest progressive or leftist names in Europe and far from Europe, in the United States too. How did all these people come together? How did it work?
How?
How did all these people come together?
Oh, DiEM 25 came together spontaneously. It was after the defeat of the SYRIZA government, my resignation in 2015. I remember I was giving a talk at the Volksbühne Theater in Berlin. Together, I was being interviewed by a Croatian philosopher, young fellow, Srećko Horvat. And the audience was very interested. It was clearly a historic moment in that, average German citizens were realizing that there was something deeply rotten in the state of Europe, in the kingdom of Europe. And that was exhilarating. Suddenly it was not a north-south thing. It wasn't Germany, Greece, Turkey, France. Yeah. We all had this feeling that there was something profoundly, fundamentally wrong and we should do something about it. And so afterwards, we were having a drink, Sergio and I. We just met. And he asked me, what do you want to do next? I said, well, look, the last thing I want to do is to do that which I'm being pushed to do, to create a Greek party and run in Greek elections. Because then, nation-state-based parties no longer have the capacity to deliver on promises they make to the citizens of the nation. Because our problems are so intertwined, we need an internationalist approach. The bankers know that. The fascists know that. They're internationalizing. Okay? We progressives are the only ones who, even though we have the mentality and the philosophy of internationalism, we never actually practiced it. So I said the only thing I would be interested in doing is participating in a pan-European democratic transnational movement. He said, well, why don't we do it? And I looked at him and said, we're two idiots having coffee or drinks, in a bar. How do we do that? But next morning he calls me, he said, you remember that theater we were in? Big, beautiful Volksbühne theater. I said, I booked it for the 9th of February. So then we sent emails. And these people came. And, within 24 hours we had 40,000 members. That's why I'm saying it was just created spontaneously.
And talking about one of those, again, talking about the M25, it's a large movement. It's a pan-European movement, but it also extends borders, in my view, from what I read. What is your agenda for Turkey?
It's exactly the same as our agenda for Greece, for Portugal, for Britain, for Ireland. We don't recognize borders. We disdain borders, especially the borders of the EU. Who is in the EU, who is not in the EU is a bureaucratic decision and actually quite a racist decision. Right? I mean, the worst punishment ever inflicted upon the French government by the Greek government was when the Greek government under George Papandreou removed our veto for Turkey coming to the European Union, because then the French had to do it. So for us, Europe is an idea. Anybody who conceptualizes themselves as European, as well as other things, I mean, I'm Greek. I'm Greek and I'm European. I also have an Australian identity because I spent time in Australia. I personally believe that we have our own self-identity. We choose if we want to think of ourselves as European or not. If we do, then we are part of DiEM. So we have DSCs, collectives of DiEM25 in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, made up of Argentines. We have in New York. We have in South Korea, believe it or not, of Koreans who are members of DiEM25. Anybody who thinks of themselves as European is part of DiEM25. So our agenda for Turkey is the same as the agenda for any part of Europe or for any citizens who consider themselves to be European. But don't forget also that together with Bernie Sanders and others, we are now making this more official by integrating DiEM25 within the Progressive International. So, it's about time we have an internationalist agenda. I'm here, I'm in Istanbul, I'm at home. It makes no difference whether I'm in Istanbul or Thessaloniki, no difference whatsoever. The languages are slightly different. But everything else is, for me, there's a seamlessness about it. We better translate that seamlessness that we feel to a seamlessness when it comes to facing down the problem with the climate catastrophe, the marginalization of large chunks of humanity, the precariousness in which people live and breathe and work. These are common problems. We need to find common solutions.
Okay, so a name that came up in our interview twice or three times now is Bernie Sanders, who was an obscure senator 4 years ago that rose to prominence and became one of the biggest political figures in the United States and almost brought down Hillary Clinton, which was in the center of Democratic establishment. And now, 4 years later, he's running a second time, and polls are favoring him even more than it did back in 2015, 2016. How big is his chance? Do you think he can take on Biden? Him or Warren in that aspect? Do you think, what is their chance of being the Democratic candidate in 2020, in your opinion?
The worst enemy of Bernie Sanders is the establishment of the Democratic Party. They prefer Trump to win again than for the Democratic Party to win with Bernie Sanders. It's a bit like the Labour Party, where the establishment within the Labour Party would rather have Boris Johnson win than Jeremy Corbyn win. In 2016, I have no doubt, we know now, we have evidence of that the primaries were stolen, that Hillary didn't win the primaries, that Bernie was robbed. I very much fear they will do the same thing again. Let's see. We have 12 months to find out. But even if he doesn't get through, Bernie has changed the Democratic Party decisively. Today, in Congress, in the House of Representatives, there are 100 members of Congress who consider themselves openly to be democratic socialists in the United States. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would not exist without Bernie Sanders' political revolution of 2016. So he's already done his job. Whether he succeeds in becoming president, I hope he does, is neither here nor there regarding the impact he's had. He was the one, the battering ram that broke open, the gates for youngsters, especially young women, especially young black women, to enter politics and to start a process of a political revolution.
Another political figure who was obscure and had a meteoric rise is you, in my opinion, that you were an economics professor, and after becoming a minister in the SYRIZA government, you became one of the biggest and most charismatic names in European countries, almost a political rock stardom. You had a really different image than what we know as European or Eurocrats, if that's the right term, for European Union politicians. You rode a motorbike, you weren't afraid to say, and you went to Brussels and actually stood up to this crisis that was happening for a long time before you started your ministry. It's kind of a big question, and I know you wrote a book about this, so how was being a politician like that different, being known, and how did it go to go there, stand against people like Angela Merkel and French government and the European Union establishment in general?
The worst part of it was what was going on inside my own government. People ask me this question: how hard was it to go and confront Wolfgang Schäuble and Christine Lagarde and Mario Draghi? It wasn't easy, but at the same time, it wasn't that difficult, because the situation was very clear. We were bankrupt. We had been bankrupted by the Greek oligarchy and the European oligarchy. They kept giving us credit cards to pretend that we were repaying the oligarchs and the bankers. And every time they gave us a credit card, they asked us to slash the pensions of the poorest. They asked us to give away parts of our sovereignty, our assets. And this was a never-ending doom loop. So I was elected to say no. Kill me, shut down the banks, bomb us, we are not going to participate in this. And I was proposing to them, from an economic point of view, technocratic solutions that were sensible. They were better for them as well. They would get more money out of us if they followed what I was proposing. So that was the easy part, really. I mean, it was nerve-wracking and very stressful and hard work, but it was quite straightforward. But there was no doubt that we were on the right. The difficulty was when I started realizing or feeling that my own comrades were plotting behind my back the surrender. That was a pain that I do not wish on my worst enemy.
And so, one last question, which will be another, I guess, a big question to say. You became the Greek finance minister in a time of crisis that Greek economy was probably not recovering from the crisis that started a while back. Now, Turkey is in another political tight point, which has been for a while now. What would you do if you were the finance minister, the minister of treasury today in Turkey? What would you do differently?
Well, the problem that Turkey has, the Turkish economy has, is that its reliance on foreign capital. You have a current account surplus that needs to be financed, and the only way that you can maintain a balance when it comes to your exchange rate, for instance, is by continuing to have $150 to $200 billion every year coming into this country. And when you rely on the kindness of foreigners, of strangers, then effectively you are a hostage to the whims of the foreign investors. So the number one priority for the Turkish finance ministry, for the Turkish polity, for Turkey, is to end the current account deficit and to end the reliance on giving to oligarchs, both within Turkey and without Turkey, outside Turkey, increasing access to long-term assets in Turkey. Effectively, you're selling Turkey bit by bit. That is the long-term problem that you have. Empowering the Turkish smaller entrepreneurial classes to produce value, as opposed to simply reproduce products on behalf of foreign companies that come in. That is also part of the long-term strategy. In the short term, I think you need a lot more flexibility when it comes to interest rates. This fixation with low interest rates is a kind of populist fallacy that exacerbates the short-term problems.